On some nights, the future arrives quietly. In 1957, it arrived with a sound no one could ignore. A single satellite, small, polished, fragile, slipped into orbit and began to beep. That beep meant something unsettling. Someone else had reached space first. And once something is possible, it becomes inevitable. On October the 4th, 1957, Sputnik 1 circled Earth, not as a weapon, but as a message. The fear wasn't the satellite itself, it was the rocket beneath it. The same physics that lifts a beacon can also deliver force across oceans. People stepped outside and looked up, not because they could see it, but because they could feel it. Space was no longer a dream, it was a destination. The United States responded quickly as Explorer 1 reached orbit in January 1958. It carried instruments, not symbolism, and revealed the Van Allen radiation belts. Space wasn't empty, it was an environment with rules. Rules matter because once you understand them, progress becomes possible. Less than a year later, NASA was formed, a new agency with an ancient instinct: reach beyond. The space race wasn't born from romance. It was born from urgency, because first could change what safe meant. Engineers sharpened pencils because rockets don't run on speeches, they run on math. Early rockets were brave but clumsy. Sometimes they flew, sometimes they didn't. Both sides pushed toward the same goal: a human alive beyond Earth. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin orbited the planet. One revolution and history tilted. In May 1961, the United States set a simple deadline: land a human on the moon and bring them home. The point wasn't poetry, it was proof. For the first time, a person saw Earth whole. No borders, no edges, just home. In response, America accelerated Project Mercury. The goal was survival, then mastery. Mercury flights were brief, but they proved something essential. A human body could endure space, and a human mind could function there. Spaceflight stopped being experimental the moment repetition became possible. Soon, can we became how far, and how far became the moon. The moon looked close until the numbers were done. To reach the moon, riding wasn't enough. Astronauts had to work. NASA built Gemini, 2 astronauts. Longer missions, harder problems. Gemini 3 launched in March 1965, proving a spacecraft could change its orbit on command. That sounds small. It's the difference between near and there. Gemini mastered rendezvous, 2 machines, alone in orbit, finding each other. It mastered docking because the moon could not be reached in one piece. It mastered spacewalks, a calm name for leaving your ship and trusting your suit. The Soviet program pressed forward too. In 1963, Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in space. In 1965, Alexei Leonov stepped outside his capsule. The universe greeted him with silence and danger. In 1966, Lunar 9 made the first successful soft landing on the moon. The moon stopped being a symbol and became a place. In 1970, a Soviet rover called Lunokhod 1 began driving across the lunar surface. Not for a flag, but for data, measured 1 careful meter at a time. That same year, Luna 16 returned samples to Earth without a crew. It was a different kind of victory, quieter, but still real. Behind the scenes, the Soviet Union also chased a crewed moon landing. Their heavy-lift rocket never became reliable enough, and the attempt faded into history. Astronauts became technicians, pilots, problem solvers. Meanwhile, Soviet missions kept pace as records shifted and headlines changed. But the real progress was quieter. Competence earned one test at a time. Gemini didn't make headlines, it made Apollo survivable. Apollo was the leap, a commitment, not a gesture. It required a new rocket, the Saturn V, powerful enough to escape Earth. It also required humility, because space punishes assumptions. On January 27, 1967, tragedy struck when 3 astronauts were lost during a ground test. Their names were Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. Remembering them keeps the story honest. Because ambition without honesty doesn't survive reality. The lesson was brutally specific. Details decide outcomes. Materials, procedures, and that hatch, everything had to be redesigned for reality, not optimism. Progress slowed, and safety became non-negotiable. Designs were rebuilt, and procedures rewritten line by line. This was the quiet courage of engineering. No speeches, just accountability and the patience to rebuild what had failed. Apollo returned to flight, not faster, better. Apollo 8 did something unprecedented when it left Earth without a landing plan. No rescue, no backup. When the spacecraft vanished behind the moon, every human voice went silent. Then contact returned, and Earth exhaled. Apollo 11 launched on July 16, 1969. 3 astronauts, 1 fragile plan. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would descend, while Michael Collins held orbit alone. Even at the climax, the mission was still a team. The journey outward was precise because there is no margin on a 250,000-mile throw. As Eagle descended, alarms sounded, not loud but urgent. The computer was overloaded, not broken. Mission Control had seconds to decide what mattered and what could be ignored. Fuel was running low, and landing zones weren't safe. Armstrong took manual control to find safer ground. In that moment, landing became surviving the landing. And one human decision changed everything. The engine cut. We had arrived. The first steps became immortal, but the real achievement was discipline. The famous line mattered because it was true. A single step can carry the weight of years of practice. Checklists, experiments, samples, and silence, broken only by breath. Above them, 1 astronaut orbited alone, guarding the way home. Landing wasn't the achievement. Returning safely was. When they came back to Earth, the impossible became proven. More missions followed, some smooth, some unforgettable. Apollo 13 reminded the world of the cost and the power of calm thinking. Later missions stayed longer and even drove across another world. Apollo stopped being just a landing and became a laboratory. On the later missions, astronauts deployed experiments, gathered deeper samples, and left instruments that kept listening after they were gone. By late 1972, lunar landings ended, but knowledge remained. The problem was never the moon. The problem was sustaining the will to keep paying for the climb. Attention shifted from flags to endurance. The next frontier wasn't distance, it was time. Skylab turned space into a workplace where days became weeks. The Soviet Salyut stations pushed the same lesson from another direction. Staying changes you. The race began to change shape, from rivalry to a cautious respect. In 1975, amid a brief thaw, 2 rival programs attempted something practical. They tested whether docking standards could work across borders. Apollo and Soyuz docked in orbit. Hatches opened and hands met. It was cooperation with guardrails, not a reset of history. useful, limited, and fragile by design. The handshake was real, but it wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a moment of restraint inside a larger, dangerous rivalry. It proved one narrow truth. You can standardize a handshake in space. You cannot standardize trust on Earth. It wasn't the end of competition. It was proof that space can outgrow it. A race can sharpen ambition, but it can also remind us how quickly respect can be lost. History doesn't guarantee progress. It only proves what humans are capable of, for better or worse. Yes, it built rockets, but it built more than hardware. It built computing, navigation, and materials science. It built mission control, with hundreds of minds acting as one. It built procedures, because probably fine is not a standard. It built a new kind of hero, not the lone genius, but the coordinated team. If this feels distant, remember this: the people who did it still doubted and learned as they went. They were not superhuman, they were disciplined. The space race is often framed as a duel, but it was really a conversation. The universe asked, "How serious are you?" We answered with a rocket taller than a building. We invented new mathematics before lunch and still argued about whose turn it was to make the coffee. We sent people into darkness and trusted knowledge to bring them home. There's something deeply hopeful in that, not because it was easy, but because it wasn't. It required patience, the kind that looks like repetition. It required courage, the kind that straps in and says, "Go." And it required wonder, the quiet force that makes us look up. That wonder is still here, in every launch, every image, every question. The space race didn't end curiosity, it proved curiosity can be built. So if the world feels heavy, do something simple. Step outside. Look up, not for answers, but for perspective. We crossed space with slide rules and courage, so whatever you're building, start the countdown. Because the future still belongs to those who try. Sometimes it arrives with a beep. We left Earth and we came back. That's the space race, not just a story of reach, but of return. And the reach continues. And somewhere, someone is still checking the math, just to be sure. From a beep in the dark to the discipline of coming home, you're always welcome here. And remember, it's Illumentary.